You're tuned in to the BS Check-In podcast, the space where we just don't talk about leadership and strategy. We check all the BS that gets in the way of our growth. I'm your host, Tracy, and I'm here with another bold guest who's ready to share the truth, cut through the noise, and help us step into something greater. Let's check in. Now, today I have with me Rudy Bustamante. How are you doing today, Rudy?
I'm well. How about you?
Oh, I am doing fantastic now that we're doing the BS Check-In podcast. Really excited for what we have going on. But before I get into the BS Check-In trivia night, I want our listeners to learn a little bit more about you. So, Rudy, if you don't mind, introduce yourself and tell me about your business.
So my name again is Rudy Bustamante. I'm also with One Indiana Property and Casualty, and I have Bustamante Consulting. My business is morphed into a bilingual consulting, but is also more about like bilingual. I call it the financial Swiss Army knives. Most of us try to figure out where we're going with our financial decisions. So my job is to help you understand high level what is going to happen whenever you make a decision around anything you want to do with your finances. Do a lot of small business owners, individuals, it doesn't matter. The goal is always, like you said, put the BS in front. Let's figure out what's going to happen when we do what we want it to do. And is it doing what we want it to do? If not, we continue to adjust.
I know that's right. And I love that Swiss Army analogy. Like, it looks like you have one tool in your hand, but but there's many things that it can do, right? Is that?
We should actually, because at the end of the day, everybody has an expert. So the way I kind of view it is that if you were to sit down with your doctor and they get to know you well, then they start figuring out, okay, maybe we need to go see a specialist. We need to go take a look get an MRI. We need to get a CT scan. So that's my job, to get to know my client and allow the client to tell me who they are, what they are, where do they do, where do they want to go, what have they done, and let's figure out next steps. And we're always going to do it together.
Thank you for sharing that. And then you also said that you're a bilingual consultant.
Yes.
Talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
I was raised in Costa Rica. I was born here. My parents are Costa Rican. So I'm one of the first generation Latinos that is actually in the state that I'm fully bilingual. And what is that with the influx of Latinos, we have had many, many, many come into the United States. We have had many, many come to Indianapolis over the last, 15, 20 years. But the biggest thing is that I'm learning is that most of them do not have a financial background because of where we have been brought up from. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of these tools and systems that do not exist in other countries or United States only. So I've been here long enough to learn. Now my mission has become, okay, let me make my Latino family just as versed in finances that my American family is.
I love that inclusive approach and helping Latinos that are especially moving into Indiana, acclimate to some of the Hoosier ways and systems that are in place so that they can excel as well. I love that. Super cool. Now, what made you get into that?
Specifically, I was into I'm trying to think of, it was 20, wow. Yeah, it was about 10 years ago. 12, oh my goodness, 12 years ago. I was sitting down after another 14-hour shift at a restaurant. Mm-hmm. I was in 20th year working in a restaurant. And I really wanted to know, one, did I have the energy to do another 20 years before I retire? And the answer was no to both. So I started doing some research about, financial planning. But it was more about like, what do you do? And it became very confusing. There was a lot of people out there giving very broad blanket statements. And what would happen is that my brain would go, okay, so if it's that easy, why is 87% of Americans have to go back to work because they have to, not because they want to? What are these things? Financial planning at the time was only about 10 years old. So financial planning is a very, very, very new concept that has only really been around for 15 to 20 years. Yep. I think the initial financial planning people really started ramping up in the 1994, 95. There's some that go back to the 80s. There's some people that when you start looking into the history of it, true financial planning was not really stated until like 1996 or so.
Wow. Now that is really interesting, but it shows you that there was definitely a need for that. But what triggered that need? I know we're about going down a rabbit hole, but what do you think triggered that need for financial planning at that point?
So you're really going to go down a rabbit hole now. So I'm going to try to summarize it as best as I can.
Okay.
So there was a time when there was pensions,
Okay.
right?
Yes.
So
Yes.
you hand your money to a company or you work for a company that you work X amount of years, they give you a salary when you retire. Well, some folks said, we don't like that. We don't like you taking our money and telling us how much we're going to have. So we want our own money. In order to do that, then the big company said, you know what? Fine, have your money. And because it's really, really hard to maintain funds. Um, to maintain and guarantee a payout for someone, you have to be very, 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 very strategic with your money. Hence, that there's not many pensions left. Social Security as a country, we're struggling maintaining that. So picture a company.
Mhm.
So they just said, fine, here, have your money. So people took it and went, oh, what do we do with it? Started making bad choices.
Uh,
That's where it completely started evolving. And that's where the whole movement came. At one point, people weren't saving for money. So that's when the government said, oh, we're going to give you this thing called an IRA. You save money, you're going to be able to write it off. So that was the initial. And some people said, well, I like
mm.
this later. I don't want to pay taxes later. I want to pay them now. So that's where the Roth came about. And then corporations said, hey, we want to offer something to these people, but you don't have anything to give us. So the government said, hey, you know what? You take an IRA and we're going to we're going to put a tax code in there. It's going to be called a 401k. You put money in, we'll get to deduct it, but that incentivizes people to save and it gets you to save money in your taxes. They said, great. Boom, here's another one. And then other companies said, I told you we were going to go down a rabbit hole. Then other people were like, wait a minute, we're a school. We want to do that. Okay, well, let's create a 457. Oh, we're a firefighter. Let's create a 457. So that's the
Mm.
whole movement. And that's where financial planning comes because people really didn't know where to go. There's some that are based on investments. There's theories out there. It's like the spin down rule, which is, you live off of 3% well, they call it a 3% rule, 4% rule, but you can say, you're going to get to retirement and you're going to spend this much money. That rule was created, I think, almost 45 years or 50 years ago. And it was by one of the original financial planners. So, like I said, early 80s, like mid 80s, you started seeing it, but the movement didn't start until the 90s when it really started pushing through.
That makes so much sense, Rudy. Thank you for sharing that because, I've been doing some research on my own, just some background information on the timeline of pay here in the United States and the timeline of healthcare benefits as well. And I did see where it switched it switched from pensions over to the 401k. It didn't really go into the details. And so that makes so much sense what you're saying here. So I appreciate that because, sometimes we're thinking about how do we create change or impact change, but first we need to understand the history
Correct.
a little bit more. So I appreciate that. So tell me, who do you work with? Who are the type of people, if for the listeners that are listening to this and they're hearing the knowledge that you're spitting and they might say, well, I want to work with him. Who are that you work with?
At this point, I'm proud to say that I will work with anyone and anyone. I have
Okay.
clients some of my current clients have allowed me to work with their children. So I'm
Okay.
working with 16-year-olds, which is amazing, right? Because you can put them in a path to
Okay. So step back real quick. You said working with 16-year-olds. What does that look like, a financial planner? Like, what are the conversations that you all are having?
just the same as I would have with you, but with
Okay.
a lot of different and a lot more time. So if you and I were sitting down, we have to look at where you're at, how old, when you're planning on retiring, what are you saving for, how much money do you make? So we're almost putting a backdoor in to create a financial plan. Whereas a young adult, they don't have anything. So we can put financial planning first and then moving everything else second.
That's smart, especially when we're talking about financial literacy for our children. I mean, that's a great example of what financial literacy can look like, or at least activities moving towards that direction.
It's such a powerful movement. And I love it because, again, the one thing I've learned really, really quickly is that, the quicker we get to money, the quicker we spend money. So if we don't have a true financial in place, nobody adheres to it.
And that's true. You can't track what you're not measuring,
Correct.
right?
And you know how people love their budgets, right? So, those are the things that you run into is that, people don't love budgets. So, I started doing what I call, instead of budgets, I call them spending plans. You get to spend
Mhm.
that money however you want to. It's just a matter of you make your own decisions. So if you want to spend, I did the math once. If you went to Starbucks 5 times a week for a year,
Mhm.
you're spending almost $2,000 in Starbucks.
Oh my goodness.
Yep.
Oh, those would be great infographics to share on LinkedIn. Like, yeah, that would be really cool just to kind of show the visual, right? Just to show how that could really impact your saving power. And I love how you switched it from budget to spending plans, right? Because budgeting sometimes does give that negative connotation where it's restrictive. I can't do this. But where a spending plan is like, yeah, you can spend up to this limit. So it's just a different way to say the same thing, but yet it does something to the mindset. So that's interesting. So earlier you had said that you said you'd be willing to work with anyone. And then you said, but to begin with, you had said earlier in our episode, you said one or two people or nonprofit. So talk a little bit more about those different type of setups, like a solopreneur versus maybe a two-person organization, maybe to a 5 team to where, they're moving into the 15 and being considered for a lot of laws at that point.
Well, at that point, so and it seems to me that the space that I'm living in quite often now is the solopreneur, like you said, one, two
Okay.
business, is smaller. But as I'm working more and more, with the ramp up of business, especially if the business you find it being successful, in order for it to be able to grow, you have to put pillars in. You have to start almost building the bridge to get you from, okay, wait a minute, we started out at $100,000 a year. Now we're going to 200,000 within 6 months. I'm working at a current organization that within the first year they hit the first $1 million.
Oh, wow.
So it's putting in the pillars and seeing the field so you're able to lay in the foundation for growth. So you can set yourself up as a business from infancy to expect to be what a full grown up person or full grown up business would be. So it's navigating how to put in the right tools to be able to morph into growth, whether it's fiscally, whether it's wanting to raise capital, whether it's wanting to be able to sell your business at one point, to host more employees, to create a true legacy plan. So there's several different ways you can approach your business to make it more tractable for many different reasons, but it's beginning with the end in mind. How do I look at my business and where do I want it to go? Now that you see that, what do we put in front of it?
That's good. I'd love to, maybe we can talk about that later, probably even maybe do like an online kind of a quick, brief way of doing this. Of course, not showing all of your secret sauce, but it'd be cool to like, just an abbreviated version of that, just to give people an idea of what that really is, right? Because sometimes people can hear things and not really be able to process it in a way that makes any sense to them. But sometimes just being able to work through and work through something visually can give people an idea like, oh, okay, now I can see what the potential of something like this can do, especially for people that are typically in our community. We don't tend to think about finances in this way, right? Like you said earlier, sometimes we get money and we just want to spend it right away. But, being able to see what it would be like if we didn't rush to spend our cash right away.
Because whatever your childhood, you can sway you hard. I know that I went through it when I started working when I was 13 years old, and every bit of my money went home to survive. So when I came to United States, I was getting paid $3.35 an hour, and
Wow.
I remember. Yeah, we say as little, but the first time I saw that paycheck, it was like, wow, look at all that money. So
Wow.
it was fascinating to have that much money in my hand. So since all I knew was scarcity, right, my mind went straight to abundance. Like, oh, more I make, more I get to spend. Look, nobody gets to tell me. I get to eat whatever I want. I get to, so again, your culture, your background, how you see things, it all shapes you financially too. And I don't think we don't spend enough time talking about that.
No, we don't. I think that, and great point, because I think that a lot of us just kind of go through life and not really pay attention to some of those things and then question why we're not where we want to be, not realizing that there's some foundational pieces, we haven't been paying attention to. But it does go back to the mindset, right? Like it does go back to our lived experiences from when we were kids and what we were accustomed to, what we saw around us, the type of language that was used around money definitely impacts us as adults, but we don't, check that BS. And that's that belief system, right? Like sometimes we don't check it. We don't ask it questions enough just to make sure to see, is it still in alignment with what we're trying to create? Because sometimes it's not. And that money mindset is definitely a key skill, definitely something that we should be all, implementing, especially people within our community who may not be used to, seeing consistent money on a regular basis. Because I appreciate what you said earlier. I said, wow, at the $3.35. But, at that time, it wasn't a wow. It was, I'm appreciative money. So I think great perspectives to have as well. So let's talk about, the BS check-in trivia night. It's a new event. And first of all, I just want to say thank you, Rudy, for being a part of this event. The BS check-in has been something I've been dreaming about for quite some time. And initially when we all met, even though that was something I had been working on before, I didn't really think, to create an event with that until the more we talked, Rudy, the more that we talked and our conversation still led back to the BS. And I thought, you know what? Maybe, this is another opportunity for me to, bring out this BS check-in component. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, the evolving topic of BS check-in has led to some very fun and invigorating conversations. And it's really, and I think it's something that I think we would be in a better space in many different places if we approached it with a curiosity mindset. Like, is this really BS or is this truth? Right? I think I've mentioned this to you. There's a great article called The Confident Idiot that all it talks about is like how I think the study showed that 50% of people, 50 or 60% of people show and are pretty passionate about topics that they have only heard. And that to me was another reason why I'm where I am. I believe I am put to be where I'm at is because I don't just take blanket answers. I want to know
Yes.
more. Just because it worked for you didn't mean to work for me. And I think that falls into everything we talk about, every conversation that you have, just because something that works for you doesn't mean that it works for me.
That's
But
right.
there's pieces of that it could, right?
That's right.
Just because something that you did is powerful doesn't mean it isn't, right?
That's
Or
right.
is it? So it's just, working. I think the more we talked about it is creating a collaborative space for people that are in the BS to see beyond the BS and see how we work together to create some good solutions and good conversations to continue to grow.
Yes, yes, yes. I love that. Like as you were speaking, it brought to my remembrance, like as I was doing the research on the different, like the healthcare, for example, it's interesting how, we do things that moment in time. And then sometimes we hold on to it and we're looking at it and we're trying to make it work. But sometimes it's like we're sticking with it because we're used to it and we're familiar with it. But does it still serve a purpose that's helpful? And I think that that's something that people don't want to check the BS on. So they hold on to things that are old, right? Because they're like a lot of these healthcare things that we see, a lot of them are very, we do a lot of the same things today, but I just wonder like how much of it in the healthcare industry would we change? Like if we were trying to make benefits fit for today's time as, instead of holding on to what it was answering back then. Does that make sense, Rudy?
It does. And I think what we have is to really take a look at the system, right?
Mhm.
So as you're navigating, and I think you and I had this comment, like, I wonder how many people actually went to their employees and said, what benefits do you want? Because what we're finding is that most people that offer don't get used because somebody else is able to use them. So they have a spouse, right? They have a
Mhm.
spouse that has a bigger program. So, one of the myths that is still true, will always be true, is that the bigger the program, the less the payment, right? But it also depends on the shape of the plan. So a lot of people don't even go to their provider because they can't afford it. They don't need it. They don't use it. They have other ways. So it's really about digging in and finding out, okay, what does my employer or my employee really want? Go from there. And I promise you, it's not always health insurance.
But that's the one that people tend to go to. And I understand, of course I know healthcare is something big, so I'm definitely not saying that that needs to to be waived. But there's some organizations that maybe they can't pay for it, but I'm pretty sure there's other perks or there's other things that could really fill in the gap. But it seems like the number one thing that most people don't want to do is have that conversation of what do you want? What are you looking for? Because it's as if they can't deliver, then they don't want to have the conversation.
Correct.
But
You
they
can't
could
deliver, it's too
deliver.
expensive or whatever that is, right?
Yeah. So I'm really excited. So these are the type of conversations we'll be having at the BS check-in trivia night, right? Like, we're going to start with just real conversations. Like, what are you seeing, especially since open enrollment season is right around the corner. When we're thinking about bringing awareness to the type of benefits that we have, how are we doing that, right? Like, these are the type of questions, and hopefully there going to be more people in the room with some solutions or with some tried practices that they have implemented, and they can share their success stories, their horror stories, but still be able to be there and share those stories with other people. Because it just seems like we need to start talking about this in a more open way, like checking that BS for sure, like checking the BS and then kind of see what are those business struggles. And then what are some bold steps that you can take to move towards what you're looking for? And then we'll end the night with some fun trivia. Yes, really excited for that. So I'm going to go ahead and ask you a few questions before, just ask you a few questions and see how you answer it. What wisdom you can share with the listener about this, especially since you've been in your business for quite some time. I mean, you've been working since 13. There's a lot of insight you can definitely share with us as a business owner. So Rudy, you've built your practice around business development and coaching. What's the biggest BS you see tripping up small business owners in their strategic planning?
The number one is that I personally think is that they try to do it all up front. I think that business owners they're so afraid of losing control that they think it's better to do it all. So they focus on everything and they don't focus on, by focusing on everything, they really don't focus on anything. So there's always slips. The other biggest piece of issues that I see is that they're really, really good at what they need to be doing as a business. So the business owner mindset is not there. So that's the number one thing I find myself going, you don't realize it, but you're still a worker of your business. So
Oh my goodness.
you're not a business owner, you're somebody that owns a business that does something well, but you're not a business owner yet.
That is so on point because I think that was a mindset that I struggled with for a bit. And maybe in the sense of where, I was looking at the work and I was just like, I feel like an employee still. Like I still feel like an employee. And I agree. And I guess I'm using my words here with the employee mindset, but this was something that I was thinking about a while ago that I got to get out of the employee mindset and really step into the business owner mindset. And I like how you said that. You said that, it's like, you could be the business owner who are actually, doing things to push the business forward. Or you can be more like the person, who does things really well, but you're playing the part of a business owner and not really stepping into the role, embracing it. Because it is a different shift of the mindset into work. Yeah, definitely. So then how do you craft a coaching program, right? Because as a business coach, how do you craft a coaching program that cuts through the noise, especially when a client might be overwhelmed with the options or stuck in indecision, especially if this is their first time owning a business and from being an employee?
You have to spend a good amount of time figuring out who they are, because that as you're shaping coaching, as you're teaching, it's really about like what makes them tick, because everybody opened up a business for a reason. Now it's figuring out what that reason and why the importance of the reason why I like to go there first, because that helps me figure out what their behaviors are. So somebody is fearful of the future and they don't know how to deal with figuring out if they're open till tomorrow. You can't talk to them about long-term planning. If somebody is barely making bills, you can't really talk to them about, financial stability.
So you could
Meet them where they're at and then go from there. But it really is always the mindset that I try to put in my head is like, let me see how they see themselves. And if they see themselves as a business owner that is not in the weeds, then that's great. Now, if they don't see themselves that way, how do I get them to see themselves that way? So it's just a very fluid, spending time on it and sharing moments with people for them to really peel back and go, okay, this is where I'm at. I like it, but I like to do this better. So in order to be effective as a coach, you have to be very in tune to who they are. You got to really know where they want to go.
Now, so you mentioned something about, thinking like a business owner, and a question popped into my head. If you can answer, what would you say is a difference between a business owner versus an entrepreneur? Or if there is any
Uh,
difference in the way that you see it?
I laugh because it is a very big difference. The reason why, see, an entrepreneur, I find entrepreneurs to be more like artists. They have a very big creative side. And so they're out creating, and they either love to create or they love to hunt. How do I get bigger,
Mm,
better? Right? How do I, so I'm creative. So I love to figure out how to make this a business. But really, the business owners creates the business and turns it into a business. It's almost like they want to do it from afar, where entrepreneur is doing it themselves.
because I always like, for me, I try to ask myself, like, what do I consider myself? And honestly, I'm more of an entrepreneur. I'm always thinking, how can I create something different, something big? But then, but I think I still need to embrace the business owner mindset to build the stability as well, instead of always wanting that excitement of creating something different, big, new, see what I can do with that. So it's just interesting. Thank you for sharing that, because that was funny. And I know we're wrapping up. We're getting close a little bit time. So I'm going to have maybe two more questions and then we'll wrap up. So what's the most surprising insight you've uncovered while coaching executives that changed how you structure your sessions?
The most surprising that people make more emotional decisions than business decisions on a day-to-day basis. I
Yeah.
really find that fascinating. And the reason why I find it fascinating, because again, it goes back to your numbers, but like you're talking to people and getting to know them, because there are certain people that are very numbers. So I call it, the reason why I bring up numbers is because usually a business person will gravitate to numbers. I strongly feel like there's a happy medium, because you have to care about the numbers, but you have to care about the people, you have to care about the product, you have to do it all. Right. Business owner, they're the few that can shut it down and just look at numbers and go, that doesn't work. Done. We're going to fire this person. We're going to do this. Whereas I think that the emotional part of it, I think that's the thing that surprises me the most, that most people are more involved emotionally in their business that they care to admit to.
That's deep, Rudy, because, I feel like that all people, would be more emotionally, attached. But you're saying that being able to, the more business minded approach would be to look a little bit more at the numbers, and not to say not to have any emotions, but to understand the numbers and how that impacts your business, and make a strategic decision rather than an emotional
Correct.
decision.
Correct.
Oh, that's tough. And it's like, so would you say, if you're looking at older business owners and versus younger business owners, would you separate it in that group? How would you separate that mindset in groups?
No, it's definitely a
It's
time, not
okay.
an age thing. It's more about, I think it's like a business ground, like a business. I think it's more about the business. It's where they grew up, how they grew up, right? So if somebody,
Okay.
if you have a seasoned pro, like there's a lot of people that call themselves CFOs now or CEOs now, but they're really not, right? And so that's the type of mindset. You can have a very young person that is really business savvy, but they're not people savvy. So and I've seen it on both sides. So I think it's more about the background again. When I owned my first restaurants, I was really, really good at managing a restaurant and making really good food, but I didn't know the backside. So guess why I failed? I was not a business person. I was too busy making pizza and running the business that business ran me out.
Okay. Okay. And we always hear that spending, setting the right foundations in place where you have systems working on your business so that you can work in your business, or I mean, or if you can't work on your business, well then your business might just go away and you have no business to work in.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah. No, I love all of this. So, we might just end up doing another episode, because I know I definitely did not hit all of the questions that I wanted to ask. However, I do want to thank you for your time and generosity, sharing with us, and hopefully you'll come back and share some more. Anything that you want to say, about the event coming up, or any last words of wisdom that you want to share with the audience before we wrap up?
I think the biggest thing I would love for people to understand and see is that we're not going to be talking to you. We're going to talk with you. We want to engage in conversations, because there's a lot of pros out there. So how do we bring out the pros to do a master pro table, right?
Yes.
I would love to have people completely open minded and ready to share. I think that's what I would really encourage.
I love that too. People that are willing to just come and check the BS and know it's going to happen in a safe space and a lot of fun, a lot of conversation, but a lot of learning value that you can apply in your business right away. So thank you so much for joining us today, Rudy Bustamante with One Indiana Financial and Bustamante Consulting. Thanks for joining me on the BS Check-in podcast, where we cut through the clutter and check all the BS. If today's conversation sparks something in you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it, talk about it, and most importantly, act on it. Until next time, keep being bold and keep your BS. Bye.